Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is The Lollipop, and in this video we are going to compare the entire 2023 Trek Dualsport Gen 5 lineup, specifically going over the differences between the Dualsport 1, Dualsport 2, and Dualsport 3 Gen 5 bikes. I'll cover everything from the prices and colors to the specific components like the wheels, the brakes, and the drivetrains, and then I'll organize it all in these two tables at the end of the video when I give my thoughts on which bike is the best value. If this comparison helps you out in any way, I'd greatly appreciate you liking the video and subscribing to my channel. But with that, let's get into some background information. The Trek Dualsports are classified as hybrid bikes, which means they have wider tires than road bikes and narrower tires than mountain bikes, and that generally means that they are intended to be a 50% road and 50% light trail bike. This makes them a great everyday or commuter bike because they can handle pretty much all common terrain. I do want to mention that I'm talking about the Gen 5 versions of these bikes in this video that have a new frame for 2023, but Trek is still selling the previous Generation 4 bikes that come with suspension forks and a different frame. And if you are wondering what the differences are between the Gen 4 and Gen 5 bikes, check out my last video, which I'll link in the description below and on the top right of the screen right now. And one disclaimer, I'm only going to discuss the US versions of these bikes and thus will not cover certain models available in other countries like the Dualsport Equipped or Dualsport Stagger, since these are identical to the normal Dualsports but just have some added commuter features or a different frame that is easier to get on and off of. Alright, for the actual comparison, I'm going to go over all of the shared components on these three bikes first so we can establish a baseline. The only parts that are the same among the three bikes are the Gen 5 frame, front and rear hubs, and the seat post. I won't focus on these components since they are the same on all the bikes, but I will show you all of the geometry measurements of the frame on the screen right now if you do want to pause and take a look. I covered the new frame details in more depth in my last video as well, but in general this bike has an upright and comfortable seating position that also allows you to efficiently pedal to be fast enough on the road. But moving on to the differences, let's start off with the price. The 2023 Trek Dualsport 1 Gen 5 currently costs $750 while the Dualsport 2 increases by $100 to $850, and finally the DS3 increases another $200 to $1,050. For the colors, the Dualsport 1 comes in the colors Lava, Alpine Blue, and Mercury, while the DS2 comes in Juniper, Mulsanne, and Galactic Gray. And finally, the DS3 comes in Black Olive, Crimson, and Hex Blue. For the component updates, we'll start with the front forks. All three bikes come with a rigid front fork that has no suspension, and they all have internal brake routing and a through-skew quick-release axle. And although they all serve the same function, they are made from different materials, so the DS1 uses a much heavier steel fork, while the DS2 upgrades to an aluminum alloy fork that is lighter, and the DS3 makes a huge upgrade to a carbon fork that is stronger and lighter in weight. Next we have the wheels. All the bikes use 650B or 27.5-inch diameter rims, but the DS1 and 2 both use the Bontrager Connection aluminum rims that are 20mm wide and use Schrader valves, while the DS3 upgrades to the Bontrager Covey aluminum rims. These rims are 3mm wider for more stability, use Presta valves, and are tubeless ready. For the tires, all the bikes use 650 by 50C tires, which are the same as 27.5-inch tires that are 2 inches wide for comfort and stability. The DS1 and 2 use the same Bontrager GR0 comp tires, while the DS3 upgrades to the Bontrager GR0 Expert tires, which have the same tread pattern but are tubeless ready and have puncture protection. The DS3 definitely has the advantage here since it comes with a full tubeless ready setup where you can more easily convert the bike to tubeless and remove the possibility of getting pinch flats. Now let's talk about the brakes. All the bikes use 160mm wide brake rotors in the front and rear, which is typical for hybrid bikes, but the Dualsport 1 uses Tektro branded mechanical disc brakes, while the DS2 upgrades to the Tektro hydraulic disc brakes, which are much safer since they do have better stopping power and work better in all weather conditions. The Dualsport 3 then upgrades further to Shimano hydraulic disc brakes that have similar braking power to the DS2 brakes, but are better quality and more reliable. And then for the handlebars, the DS1 uses a Bontrager riser steel bar that has a 25.4mm clamp diameter, 30mm rise, and a 600 or 620mm width depending on the frame size. This handlebar is pretty heavy and cheap, but the DS2 and 3 both upgrade to a Bontrager alloy bar that has a wider 31.8mm clamp for more strength and a lower 15mm rise. These bars are also wider in all sizes for added control over the bike. For the stems, the DS1 has the lowest quality stem for the lower quality handlebar, and it's pretty long, which isn't great for handling. The DS2 and 3 upgrade to shorter stems for better control, but the DS3 has the lightest and best quality stem overall. The saddles and grips are very similar, so I'll go through these pretty quick. So the DS1 and 2 both use Bontrager sports saddles, while the DS3 uses a Bontrager H1 saddle, which really isn't that different but does have a different design. Then the DS1 and 2 also use the same Bontrager satellite grips that are pretty cheap slip-on grips, while the DS3 uses the Bontrager XR Endurance Elite grips that are much better quality and are lock-on, so you don't have to struggle taking them on and off. And finally, we have the last difference between the bikes, which is the drivetrain. So overall, we have a mixed Shimano Tourney and Shimano Altus drivetrain on the DS1, and this one has 2 gears in the front and 8 gears in the back for a total of 16 speeds. The DS2 then uses a mixed Shimano Altus and Acera 2x9 drivetrain with 18 speeds, and the DS3 has a mainly Shimano Deore M4100 1x10 drivetrain with 10 speeds. For the specific drivetrain components, I'm going to start with the shifters. All the bikes use different speed shifters that work for their respective drivetrains, and all of them can shift up to 3 gears at once when going to an easier gear for pedaling. However, as you go up the range, the shifters get better in quality and shift smoother, but the Deore on the DS3 is the most reliable and has the best construction overall. For the derailleurs, only the DS1 and 2 have front derailleurs for shifting between the 2 front gears, but the Acera on the DS2 is much more reliable and shifts smoother. The DS3 gets rid of the front derailleur since it only has 1 gear in the front crankset, which can be a benefit since it simplifies that drivetrain and has less moving parts that can potentially malfunction. For the rear derailleurs, the DS1 and 2 both use Shimano Altus derailleurs, but the DS2 has the updated version that has more precise shifting and works for the 9-speed drivetrain. Then the DS3 has the Shimano Deore derailleur that has a clutch mechanism to add tension on the chain, which is actually a big upgrade since it prevents chain noise and prevents the chain from malfunctioning and falling off the bike, especially in rough terrain. And for the gears, the front crankset is the same forged alloy crank on the DS1 and 2, and this is a pretty generic crank with 46 teeth on the larger gear and 30 teeth on the smaller gear. The DS3 then uses a Pro Wheel alloy crank that has 40 teeth. This one is pretty generic as well, but is lighter in weight since it only has 1 gear. The cassettes are all from Shimano, and they gradually get a wider range as you go up in price to give you more incremental speeds. So we have the same number of teeth on the smallest cog, but the largest cog slowly increases to give you that wider range. But if you take a look at these drivetrains overall, you will notice that the DS1 and DS2 have the hardest gear for going faster, and the DS2 has the easiest gear for climbing uphill. So even though the DS3 is the most expensive bike, you do lose some speeds. However, for most purposes of a dual sport bike, that shouldn't be too noticeable. And the final difference we have is the weight of each bike. So the Dual Sport 1 weighs in at 30.61 pounds on average in a size medium frame, while the Dual Sport 2 weighs about 2 pounds less at 28.2 pounds, and the DS3 brings it down 2 pounds less than that at 26.2 pounds. And that's it. Those are all the differences between the Gen 5 Trek Dual Sports for 2023. Now I'll show you those completed tables and give my thoughts. So first off, the Dual Sport 1 is good if you are on a budget and still want a cool looking bike that has the new frame design, but most of the parts on this bike like the mechanical brakes, the lower end stem and the lower end handlebar, the heavier front fork and so on make it less desirable for someone who does want to use this bike a lot and have a lighter weight package that will last a long time. The Dual Sport 2 in my opinion does not have anything wrong with it. For only $100 more than the DS1, it weighs 2 pounds less, and every single component on it is a good upgrade that will be more reliable and last much longer. The DS3 is then the premium package, which is way lighter and has really good components like the Shimano brakes and the 1x10 drivetrain that is simpler and more reliable, but it does cost $200 more, which is a big price jump for me. And although it's probably justifiable, I personally think the DS2 is more than enough bike for most people, including myself, at least for the main purposes of a dual sport. If you do want a bike that is more trail ready, the DS3 is definitely the best option with the tubeless ready rims and tires and the 1x drivetrain, but if you're just using this bike to commute or go on various types of terrain recreationally, the DS2 is the winner. And that is it for this video and my thoughts. Thank you all so much for watching. I do want to hear what you guys think in the comments below, but with that, I hope all of you enjoyed, and remember to keep biking out there.